Hi everyone. Welcome to the Google Ads API Migration Workshops of 2021. This session is the Ultimate GAQL Workshop, and my name is Corey Lucino. I'm a developer advocate on the Ads Developer Relations team, and I'll be walking you through this session. Our goal today is that we're going to take a look at how to build and validate queries against the Google Ads API using the Google Ads query language, GAQL. We've broken this session down into 6, but really 7 parts. The first one being a review of an earlier session, flexible reporting, and understanding what is GAQL, why are we using it. The next part is understanding what tools we need to have to set up our environment so that you can follow along with me for the remaining parts. And then we're just going to dive into it. We're going to start looking at what programmatic options are available and what tools are available on our developer pages. So in terms of the previous class earlier today, flexible reporting, we went through what is GAQL, why are we using it. To recap, GAQL, Google Ads Query Language, is the way that you're going to get data out of the Google Ads API. Now in the AdWords API, if you're familiar with it, we used the GAQL, AdWords Query Language, and selectors to be able to pull data out. We've taken a look at how we've built our reporting in the AdWords API. We've taken a look at a lot of your feedback, and we've rolled all that together and pulled out the bad and added some new good, and we've put together the Google Ads Query Language. Now, like I had said, this is the way you're going to get data out of the Google Ads API. Whether it's a get, whether it's a report, all of the data that you're going to pull out is going to go through reporting with the Google Ads Query Language. You'll notice as you're looking at it, it's very SQL-like. But it's important to note that it's not SQL. There are only a subset of available features that you can do within the Google Ads Query Language. Much of what you can do within SQL you can't do. That said, there are some things you can do in GAQL that you can't do in SQL. Things such as implicit joining of resources to another, or things like segmentation just by selecting a field. We'll dive into that in just a little bit. The last thing I want to cover about the class earlier today is how you make calls against the Google Ads API to get back data is the same way as how you make calls against the Google Ads API to get back field metadata to understand how to build and validate your queries. So in the Google Ads API, when you're trying to get back data on ads or campaigns or ad groups, you're going to use the Google Ads service, and you're going to use either the page response method, which is search, or you're going to use the streamed method, which is search stream. Very similar, you're passing up a query. We're going to do the same thing in the GoogleAdsField service. We're going to pass up a query, and we're going to get back metadata on the actual query that we can create in the Google Ads service. This all sounds very high level right now, but we're going to dive into it in just a little bit. Just wanted to point out that more information on how the Google Ads service and the Google Ads Field service works from a technical standpoint, as well as some guides. You can find this all in the reporting section of our developer pages. Okay, so what are we doing here today? We are going to give you a better, deeper understanding of the Google Ads query language, and we'll also walk you through how to programmatically validate and build those queries, as well as what tools will allow you to do it ad hoc. Now, this is going to benefit you whether you are building a platform, a large tool to validate and build queries, such as the interactive query builder, or maybe you're just building reports for your stakeholders, and those reports need to be vetted. Those reports you need some discoverability to understand what you can and can't report on. We're going to walk you through tools to allow you to do that, all in this session. So what tools are you going to need to follow along with me today? Well, the first thing you're going to need is a browser, and I believe you're probably all in one right now. We're going to be looking at the interactive query builder, and we're going to be looking at the query validator, both of which are on our developer pages. The next thing you're going to need is a terminal, and that terminal is going to need curl. It's going to need an active Google Ads API developer token. You're also going to need a Google Cloud project that has Google Ads API enabled and have your client ID and client secret for that project as well. And the last thing you're going to need is a valid OAuth refresh token. Once you have all of these things, we can go ahead and start moving on it. If you have them all, we can just go ahead and dive right into it. If you don't have them, there is a quick start section on our developer pages that will walk you through how to go from start to first call pretty quickly. And if you are watching this delayed, there is a session as well on OAuth and authentication that I think will be really useful if you're getting set up for the first time. Okay, so let's go ahead and move right into our console, and we'll take a look at getting started here. Okay, great. Now we're in our terminal. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set some environment variables. So we're setting the API version to whatever version you're using. Right now I'm using version 8. And then like I had mentioned earlier, you'll need your developer token, your client ID, client secret, and refresh token. Just go ahead and replace the bracket, insert bracket with your value. So it's just quote, your value, quote. Notice that the OAuth 2 access token is not populated. See the comment there. Don't worry about that. Leave that blank for right now. We will populate that in the next step. So I already have mine set. I'm not going to run that. What I am going to run, however, is creating a function called genAccessToken. So this is just a helper function to make it so that we don't need to manually type out everything to generate an access token every time that we need one. If you're following along with this session, you'll probably only need to run this once. If you're watching this later on, or if you take a break, you may need to run this multiple times. So let me just go ahead and paste that in here. genAccessToken is a function. It's going to take your client ID, client secret, and refresh token, and it's going to go hit the OAuth 2 endpoint and pull back an access token for you. So let's go ahead and run that now, and let's see how we're doing. So genAccessToken, let's run this. And great, new access token generated. Now this access token is only good for a short period of time. And this access token will automatically save off into that OAuth 2 access token slot. So you don't have to do anything with this. It's just going to go ahead and work for you. All right, and I do have one more helper function for you as well. Just so we don't have to write out all the boilerplate curl every time we're making a call against the GoogleAdsField service, we've made a function to make that a little bit easier called GAFS, GoogleAdsField Service. I'll paste that in here. So this function is going to take in an argument. Excuse me. That argument is the query string that you're going to pass in. And then it's going to hit the API version specified along with your developer token and that access token we just generated to return the results from that query. So let's go ahead and give this a run, and let's just see if this is working for us before we move on to the next step. So we're going to run GAFS, and we're going to pass in a query against the field service to validate that it's actually returning data. In this scenario, we are just running a very simple query to select what segments and metrics are available for the campaign resource. And we'll dive into this in much more detail in just a little bit here, but let's go ahead and see where we're at first. Great, perfect. As long as you can see total results count 1 and you can see the data for the segments and metrics above, then you're good. We're ready to move on. So now that we've seen how to get data and we know we're authenticated, what data are we looking for? What is the first thing that we have to do to understand how to build or validate a query? Well, every query in GAQL centers around the from clause, and specifically what's called the from resource. The from resource is the resource in the from clause, but it dictates all fields that can be used within the query, not just for selecting, but also for filtering in the where clause or ordering in the order by. Everything that is within that query is dependent on what resource is in the from clause, the from resource. So let's take a look at what resources we can use in the from clause. And the answer you're going to find is actually all resources. Anything where category is resource, you can use that as the from resource, the resource in the from clause. So in this query we're running here, we're going to select where category equals resource, again, filtering down to only resources, And we're just going to select the name of that resource and its metrics just to show what other fields are available. Let's run this. Great, and you'll see there are 127 resources that we can use as the from resource within a query. So if we scroll through this here, you'll see name of this resource is web page view, name of this resource is video, name of this resource is user list, user interest. These are all different resources you can use. Let's just use a fairly common one here. Let's use campaign, and we'll stick with that going forward. And let's take a look at what we can select with or filter on or order by with campaign as our from resource. The first and easiest to get is just what attributes of campaign itself can we query. So an attribute, by nature of what an attribute is in GAQL, is the resource dot some field. So campaign.id, campaign.name. Each of those are attributes of campaign. They're fields on the campaign object. So what we're going to do is we're going to use that campaign.wildcard concept, and that's how we're going to filter down our results for only the attributes of campaign in the GoogleAdsField service. So we're selecting the names of the fields, those attributes, where the name is like campaign.wildcard. Now if I run this, I'm going to get 71 results where you can see campaign.something, campaign.something. Each of those are attributes of campaign, and they can be selected, they can be filtered, they can be ordered whenever you have campaign in the from clause. So the next thing to look at, now that we know the list of attributes that we have available to us, what else can we query along with the campaign resource? Well, it breaks down into three sections really. There are metrics, there are segments, and there are attribute resources. So to get all of those, we actually only need one query to return what is available, and that is selecting the metrics metadata field, the segments metadata field, and the attribute resources metadata field, where name equals whatever resource we're looking for, in this case campaign. So if I run this, we're going to get back 3 arrays, and each array is going to contain fields that are available of that type. Now you see total results count 1 because we filtered where the object that we want returned is the campaign resource. But within that, you're going to see the segments array, the metrics array, and the attribute resources array. So metrics is metrics dot and segments is segments dot, and you're going to notice that follows the same kind of paradigm that we saw with campaign dot. These aren't attributes, they're fields, but they follow the same format. Metrics dot something is a metric, segments dot something is a segment. So all of these fields are queryable where campaign is the from resource. Now attribute resources are a little bit different. Attribute resources, you'll notice, are actually, oops, I scrolled too far, there we go, are actually just other resources. Customer is a resource. Campaign budget is a resource. What this means is, and I alluded to this earlier on, each of these resources are actually implicitly joined to campaign. So you don't have to do a join customer on campaign ID equals campaign ID. Like, you don't have to worry about doing that. Instead, when you're selecting from campaign, you can just choose to add select customer.id, and that will automatically join the customer resource with your campaign resource and pull the data down. Attribute resources work very similarly in terms of their validation to the attributes of the resource in the from clause. By that I mean any attributes of the resource in the from clause, campaign.id, campaign.name, doesn't really require much more validation after you've added it, after you've set campaign as the from resource. And the same kind of goes for these attribute resources. If you have campaign budget .id or campaign budget.name added to your select clause, any of those attributes are able to be added. You don't really have to worry about whether or not they play nice with other fields. So to show you what is available on those attribute resources, for each one, you would actually run the same attribute lookup like we did for campaign, only you're going to use their resource, campaign budget in this scenario. So you're going to select all name of the field where the name of the field is like campaign budget dot wildcard. Running this, we're going to see that there are 17 attributes on campaign budget that are just able to be queried alongside the campaign resource. Now that we know what fields can exist within a query for the campaign resource being in the from clause, now we need to understand of those fields which can exist in the select clause, the where clause, the order by clause. Not all fields can exist in all clauses. And as a matter of fact, it's quite often that you'll find that a field is selectable, but it is not filterable. So to understand what is selectable, what is filterable, what is sortable, there are actually filterable, selectable, sortable metadata fields on each object. So in this scenario, I'm looking at the campaign.manualCPM attribute. This is an attribute on the campaign resource like we saw earlier. And I'm going to find out, is it selectable? Is it filterable? Is it sortable? What can I do with it within a query? So in running this, I'm going to see, okay, I'm getting back my resource name, manual CPM, attribute of campaign. I'm seeing selectable equals true. Great, I can select it. Now I'm also seeing though that filterable and sortable are false. This means that this field cannot be used within the where clause or within the order by clause. It can only be used within the select clause. We could go through and we could do this for each field, and that would give us a per field understanding of what are they selectable, are they filterable, are they sortable. We could also, instead of filtering this on where name equals campaign.manualCPM, we could filter this where name equals campaign.wildcard, like we've been doing in the previous examples, to give us all fields and the selectability, filterability, sortability. But let's say we just want to see only those fields, only those attributes of campaign that are filterable. So we can actually add the filterable equals true phrase into the where clause. So in this scenario, I'm saying, get me back all attributes where they're like campaign.wildcard, so a campaign attribute, and only where they're filterable. So this will give me a list of only those that I can use in the where, of those that can be used in the where clause. And you'll see the results here now are 65. There are 65 attributes of campaign that you can find, that you can use in the where clause. And the same is going to hold true for, like we had seen earlier, you can use attribute resources in the same query. So campaign budget, we had looked at the attributes of campaign budget earlier. We would actually do the same thing excuse me, with campaign budget if we wanted to see which fields of campaign budget could be used in the where clause. So again, same query, we're going to, there it is, we're going to select the name of the field where the name is like campaign budget.wildcard and where it's filterable equals true. So if I run this, I'm going to get back all of the campaign budget attributes that are able to be used in the where clause. And you'll see there are 17. So this basically sums up how to understand which attributes can be used for the where clause, for the select clause, for the order by clause. And now we need to look at the other aspects of the query, the other types of fields, metrics and segments. So metrics and segments, actually, they both are very similar in how you would figure out what can and can't be used in each part of the query. So we're just going to focus on doing it for metrics, and then you can go ahead and replicate it for segments. So for metrics, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the metrics that are available, again, for the campaign resource. So to do so, I'm going to select metrics where the name of the field we're looking at is campaign. Now this shows us all metrics that are available to be selected, to be filtered, to be sorted, and we have to figure out for each one whether they can be used in each clause. But this tells us which fields are able to be queried for the campaign resource. In this list, there's metrics.clicks, metrics.impressions, all of the metrics available for the campaign resource. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to save off this metrics list to a variable. So I'm just going to go ahead and, again, select it into a metrics variable locally. Okay, great. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do a very similar query to what we had done for attributes. I'm going to select, I'm going to call the Google Ads Field service selecting the name of the field where sortable or filterable or whatever I'm looking at is true. But instead of doing where name is campaign.wildcard, instead I'm going to say where name is in the list of metrics that we just saved. So that's going to look like this. We're going to select, again, name of the field, where the name of the field is in that metrics list that we just saw, and where, again, sortable equals true, filterable equals true, selectable equals true, same paradigm for all of them. Now this is going to give us 83 results, and you're going to see that each result returned is a metric, and each of those metrics in the scenario of the query that we just ran are able to be used in the order by. They are sortable. You can do the inverse of this as well. If you wanted to say, okay, but which ones are not sortable? You could just change this to false. It's going to work the same way. You're going to see there's only one metric in this for the campaign resource that you can't select just because it doesn't work with the campaign resource. Now, it would be the same thing, again, like I said, for filtering and selecting, and it would also be the same thing for segments. So this would be the paradigm that we can use to understand what clauses to use our fields in. There is some additional validation that needs to be done around segments, and this is due to the way that segments work. So when you add a segment to your query, it's going to automatically group by that segment. Any metrics that exist within the query are going to be bucketed by that segment. So an example being campaign.name, segment.device, metrics.clicks. Instead of just seeing the campaign and clicks associated with it, you're going to see the campaign, all devices associated with that campaign, and then the clicks for those devices for that campaign. It's going to break that out and bucket it by that segment. Due to the way that this works, there are some segments that don't play nicely with others, and there are some metrics that don't play nicely with some segments. So we need to understand, now that we know what fields can exist within the query in general, if we were to select any of those fields or filter any of those fields, which one of those fields would cause the other fields to potentially not show up, and which of those fields would be able to be selected with them. So to do that, we're going to look at the selectable with metadata array on a given segments field object from the Google Ads Field service. So let's take a look at segments.device. We'll just continue with that one. And in this case, we are hitting the Google Ads Field service and saying, get me the segments.device field object and return me the selectable with array. So the selectable with array is going to contain all metrics, segments, and resources that are able to be selected with this segment. Now I say resources, it functions the same way that an attribute resources array would function. If a resource is listed here, you would just look up all attributes for that resource, and then those can be selected with this segment as well. Anywhere you see a metric or another segment, those metrics or segments can also be selected alongside the current segment that we're looking at, segments.device. And I keep saying selected. I think it's important to note that it's not just selectability, it's existing within the query together. So segments.device can be selected or filtered at the same time, or sorted at the same time that metrics.clicks, for example, at the bottom of my screen, at the same time that can be selected, filtered, or sorted. So if there are any metrics, segments, or resources that don't exist in this list, If you were to add segments.device to your query, they would not be allowed in. It's difficult to see in this view, and we actually have a much better view into this, a way that we can programmatically go about understanding what fields are able to play nicely with certain segments. And we're actually going to go to our developer pages now to take a look at that through the interactive query builder. So the first thing you'll notice here is that we are in the developer pages of the Google Ads API, and we are looking at the reporting section where you would normally find our reporting reference docs. The Google Ads Query Builder exists here on the left-hand nav under a Query Builder subsection, and you'll be able to find all of our resources here listed where you can click one, like I've chosen Campaign, and you'll be able to pull up the Query Builder for that resource and be able to interactively walk through and build it out. In case you haven't seen this before, I'm going to walk through the UI a little bit. The GAQL query at the very beginning, before you do anything, is just going to have a blank select. Select blank from Campaign. Campaign being hard-coded because that's the query builder for the resource we're looking at. Below that, you'll see everything that we saw in the Google Ads Field Service results. You'll see the attributes for the resource selected, and in this case it would be Campaign. You'll see the segments that can exist within a query where Campaign is the from resource. You'll see metrics that can exist in the query where Campaign is the from resource. You'll also see all of the attribute resources that can be selected or filtered where Campaign is in the from resource, and drilling into those you can see their individual attributes that are able to be within the same query. So let's just go ahead and select one here. Let's select metrics.clicks, and let's add that to our query. So I've added metrics.clicks. You'll see it in the select up above in the GAQL query section. And then this now, like I had just mentioned about the selectable with array, this may have impacted what we can select in terms of segments to exist alongside metrics.clicks within the same query. So if I were to open up the segments tab, I should see whether or not we're able to add individual segments and whether or not they play nicely with metrics.clicks. So it looks like there are a couple that don't. In this scenario, segments.conversion action or any of these segments cannot be used alongside metrics.clicks. So to get around that, we would have to remove metrics.clicks to be able to add that segment back in. Additionally, if I were to add a segment that can work alongside metrics.clicks, such as add destination type, that may impact what other segments I can add alongside that field. And you'll notice by adding that, segments.click type now shows that it is incompatible with segments.add destination type. I can now no longer add that segment. In addition, you'll notice that some of the segments that we saw before that just had a value of 1 error, now when I add segments.add destination type, they have 2 errors. The second error being that not only is it not compatible with metrics.clicks, it's also not compatible with segments.add destination type. This will allow you to interactively build out or discover what is or isn't selectable together as you're looking at what type of queries you want to put together. There is some other validation that also needs to happen to understand what can or can't exist in the select clause, and this is due to what you put in the where clause. Now, I'm just going to quickly jump to the where tab here and open up segments to show you that what we have selected, the fields that are incompatible are still incompatible here. They're not just incompatible for the select clause, they're incompatible in the query because metrics.clicks and segments.add destination type exist within the query already. So if I were to add another segment to the where clause, or if I were to add another segment to the order by even, because their presence is in the where or order by, they must also exist within the select clause. So I'm going to add network type to my where clause, and I'm going to see what happens. It's going to throw up an error, and it's going to say segments.add network type needs to also exist within the select. If it doesn't, then I can't filter on it. And it would be the same for the order by as well. So I'm going to click yes, and it's going to allow me to go ahead and filter on a value for this field. And I'm going to add this filter criteria, and you're going to see that it's now added to the select as well as filtered in the where. So this is true for most fields, but there are a couple exceptions. And those exceptions would be what we consider core date segments. A core date segment is any other segment, but specifically it is of data type date, and it is of a couple different specific fields. It is segments.date, segments.month, segments.year, segments.quarter, segments.week. So all of those segments are special in the way that they can function in the query as opposed to other segments, but they still function otherwise exactly like any other segment. They still can segment your metrics when they exist within the select clause. Now, where they're different is that they can be in the where clause without needing to be in the select clause. So if I choose segments.date as my where, and I say where date equals 2021-01-01, you're going to notice that didn't tell me that it needed to be in the select clause. Now, if I click on this error, however, it's going to say that I need at least one valid field in the select clause because there's nothing there right now. But the fact that I added segments.date is not into the where clause is not in and of itself an error. It doesn't need to exist in the select clause. So let me accomplish fixing this error. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add metrics.clicks back. Which removes that error. And I want to talk about what this query does. So what this query is going to do is it's going to give me a date bound on the values I'm returning without segmenting those values. So if I were to return a date range of 2021-01-01 to 2021-02-01, it would create a date range for the data returned, but it would not bucket my metrics returned by that date range, which is a really useful tool that you can't do with other segments, but you can do with core date segments. The other thing to note about existing in one of the clauses and needing to be in the select is that order by functions the same way. However, order by also functions this way with metrics. So if I were to add a metric to the order by, such as metrics.all-conversions, it would tell me I would need to add metrics.all-conversions to my select for it to exist within the order by. So if I say no here, it's not going to let me to add that. Great. The next thing I'm going to look at here is specifically, again, with the core date fields. If I have a core date field, a core date segment, in my where clause, I can choose to filter it however I like. 2021-01-01, that's fine. But the second I add a core date segment to my select clause, my where clause needs to have a finite date range. So I'm going to add segments.date to my select clause. You can see it now here, right? And I'm going to remove segments.date from my order by clause, or from my my where clause. You're going to see an error just popped up. And it's going to say that if I'm selecting any of the core date segments, I need to also filter on at least one of, but could be many of, the core date segments with a finite valid date range. So by finite and valid, I mean I can't say where date is greater than 2021-01-01 and date is less than 2020-01-01 because it's not finite. It's open-ended on both ends, even though it's a section in the middle missing. And it also could just be an individual date, like we saw, 2021-01-01, or it could be composed of multiple date ranges. It could be greater than 2021-01-01 and less than 2021-02-01. So let's see what that looks like. I'm going to add segments.date back to the where clause, I'm going to say greater than 2021 0101. Oh, there we go. And it's going to still have the error, same error. And I'm going to use another date, core date segment. I'm going to say segments.month, and I'm going to say less than 2021 0401, which is the first day of that month. Okay, great. So this got rid of the error. It's now a finite date range composed of multiple core date segments, and it's going to allow me to select for those 3 months what are the segments.date, what are the metrics.clicks, segment that out by date. So let's break down what exactly any given phrase here, any given filtering phrase here within the where clause. Let's break down how exactly that's built. So I'm going to clear everything here and just take a look at the where clause. I'm going to select segments.date. Now segments.date in this case is going to be our filter field. So this field is going to dictate what else can happen in this filter phrase. So this filter phrase is going to contain a filter field, a filter operator, and a filter value. You can see the filter operator is going to be dependent on the filter field's data type. So a date can have equal to, less than, greater than, between, during. There are many values that a date can have as its operator. You've seen equals. Let's go ahead and try during. Let's see what that looks like. So now that I've chosen during, which is a special operator for date fields, it's going to give me an option to choose a filter value. Now a filter value for a date time, you might say, is going to be another date time, right? It's going to be 2021 0101 like we saw before. Also with the date data type and the during clause, we have built-in date ranges that you can choose that are a little bit special. So if I were to choose this dropdown, they're enums of different date ranges just to make it easier for you when you're choosing common date ranges like today, yesterday, last 7 days. That same functionality works with other enum types that aren't date. So if I were to choose add destination type, you're going to notice that add destination type now being our filter field, you're going to notice the operators are equal to, not equal to, in, and not in. And that's because this only allows specific enums to be used, and those enums will appear in a drop-down list that you can choose from. So you can do an array compare with in, not in, or an equals to, not equals to. I'm going to say where add destination type is equal to App Store. And this filter value is now going to be the enum for App Store. And if I add this, you'll see that it shows up in quotes. And this is how we represent enums in the Google Ads Query language. It's just important to note that there are different data types. There's numbers, there's strings, and each one has its own components for which operators are available, and it has its own validation on the data value as well. So something to keep in mind as you're working through validating your queries. The last thing that I want to do is I just kind of want to put this all together, and I want to take a look at the Query Validator. And the Query Validator is also on our developer's site, and it's going to allow us to plug in a query, and it's going to allow us to see whether or not this query is valid, see whether or not there are any errors, and it's going to allow us to open that query back up in the interactive query builder if we want to continue with it. So let's just go ahead and try some examples together and see if we can solve them on our own. I'm going to paste in a query here. So select campaign ID, campaign name, segments.slot, segments.hour, and metrics.clicks from campaign. Do you think this is valid? All right, let's validate it and find out. it is invalid. Now the reason is that segments.hour is not compatible with segments.slot. So depending on which of these values we feel is more important to report on for this use case, and then potentially try to create a second query for the other pieces of information and aggregate it on the application side, we just need to figure out which one of these to remove. So in this scenario, I'm going to remove segments.slot, and I'm going to validate again, and we're going to see now that this is a valid query. Okay, let's try another one. I'm going to paste in another query. All right. So, oops, sorry, that was the same query. Give me one sec. Okay. There we go. So this one is select ad group.id, metrics.clicks, segments.conversion action from ad group. And this time we're ordering by campaign.advertising channel type. Now, why doesn't this one work? Let's validate it and see. We're going to see that there's two reasons. Segments.conversion action is not compatible with metrics.clicks. So same thing that we just saw before, we can choose to get rid of one of those, and then that portion of the invalidation list here at the bottom is going to go away. But also we're going to see that the campaign attribute that we added here in the order by is causing an error. And the reason is, like we had discussed earlier, if any attribute of a resource is in the order by, at least one attribute of that resource needs to be in the select. And this is for only attribute resources. So campaign is an attribute resource of ad group. We're ordering by campaign.advertising channel type. Therefore, at least one of the campaign attributes needs to exist within the select. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of metrics.clicks. We decided we don't want that. And in its place, I'm going to put in, oops, sorry. In its place, I'm going to put in campaign.id. Now we're adding any attribute of campaign to the select clause, so this should clear up the issue with the order by clause. And it does. The issue is now resolved. There are no fields in the select that don't play well with the segments in the select or in the query in general. And the attribute resource used in the order by, now at least one of its attributes exist within the select. All right, and the last one that we're going to do here, I'm going to paste this in as soon as I can paste it. There we go. So select adgroup.id and metrics.clicks from ad group where metrics.clicks is not equal to 1, 2, or 3. So what do you think is wrong about this one? If you're yelling at your screen that the operator is wrong, you are correct. So the 1, 2, 3 format here that you're seeing is only used with the in or not in operators. So if we wanted to say where metrics.clicks is not equal to 1 and metrics.click is not equal to 2 and metrics.clicks is not equal to 3, that would work. Or we can just change this to not in. Now validating that is going to work. This is now the correct operator for this type of data value. And that's it. That's everything. You're now on your path to becoming a reporting guru for the Google Ads API. I just want to quickly recap that everything that I've gone over here in terms of the tools available are accessible on our developer pages, and they're there for you for all resources. They're there for you for all queries. You can go ahead and use them for discoverability, for validation, for building out individual reports. Also, the Google Ads Field service is part of our API. If you can hit our API, you can hit that service. So feel free to consume the data from the Google Ads Field service for dynamically building queries, dynamically validating your queries, building out a reporting platform for your users. This is all available for you. And as always, you can reach out to us for support. So thank you very much for your time, and I'll see you in the next session.